Good morning and welcome to our webinar on Florida domicile considerations. My name is Chris Strafford, Group Head of First Source Bank Wealth Advisory Services, headquartered in South Bend, Indiana. Many of you on the webinar might be in different stages of thinking about spending more time in the Sunshine State. Some of you are already a resident of Florida. Some are considering becoming a resident of Florida, and others just like spending time there. First Source Bank has been holding events in Florida for several years, and I always kick off each event with the First Source Bank mission statement to help our clients, businesses, communities achieve security, build wealth, and realize their dreams. We have observed and anticipated that many of our customers will or want to retire to Florida. So we've opened an office in Florida so we can continue to serve our customers while they winter in the Sunshine State. We also can continue to serve as trustee and personal representative in their estate planning documents here in the North and also when you move to Florida. Of course, Florida has some special benefits, no state income tax and other benefits that Jeff is going to talk about today. So I'd like to introduce our speaker, Jeff Triano, from the law offices of Williams Parker. Jeff has been with Williams Parker for over 14 years and is a licensed Florida attorney. He joined the firm in 2007 after receiving his Master's of Law in Taxation from the University of Florida. He became a partner in 2013. Jeff is also a board-certified specialist in wills, trusts, and estates. So as you can see, Jeff is well-versed in today's topic. Jeff will be presenting for the next 20 minutes, and if time allows, we'll answer some Q&A at the end of the webinar. Jeff?
Thanks so much, Chris. Appreciate the nice introduction, and it's my pleasure to be here with all of you today. We're going to be talking a little bit about, as you see, the Florida domicile and residency, and we're going to talk a little bit about the differences between those two terms. And we're going to talk about what things you might need to do if you want to go ahead and make Florida your permanent domicile. So, there's a couple of things that you need to think about. And basically it involves remembering that this is a two-way street. Number one, you need to figure out how to make enough ties here in Florida so that Florida does become what we would call your legal domicile, your residency, but also your legal domicile. And that usually involves not only taking steps to establish Florida as your residence and your domicile, but also taking steps to detach from your prior state. That's equally important, sometimes even more important to do those things. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as well, because doing this process basically involves looking at things from both points of view, from the point of view of the state of Florida and the point of view of your prior state. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between the terms residency and domicile. It's a somewhat complicated concept to think about the difference between the two, but if you could just Google residency versus domicile and you'll see 100 different things pop up explaining the differences. The way I think of it is you can have more than one residency during a given year. You can be a resident of Florida from January through May, and then a resident of Massachusetts from June through October, and maybe a resident of Michigan, November and December. It basically involves where are you physically living at a given point of time. You can only ever have one domicile at a given point in time. A domicile is a legal state of mind. It's basically the place where, from a legal standpoint, it's when I'm away from this place, I would intend to return to it as my permanent. So if I'm on vacation overseas, I would intend to return to my place of domicile. And domicile, because it's a state of mind, because it involves what is your intent, where do you intend that you are a permanent resident of? You look at it from a legal standpoint by looking at all facts and circumstances. It's not just one thing. We get people who come all the time and say, I want to, what do I need to do to make sure I'm a Florida resident? Well, there is a lot of things you should do, and it's basically a set of a lot of different factors that get looked into. Here on this slide, here are several things. There are quite a few more, but I didn't want to bore you all by just going through a long list. But you'll see here, obviously, if you were where do you purchase your home? If you purchase a home in Florida, it's going to be more likely that you are going to be considered a Florida domiciliary, or a permanent resident here, particularly if you purchase rather than rent. And they do look at factors like, what is the value of your Florida property in relation to the property you may own in another state? You want to get a driver's license here. You want to register to vote in Florida. It's good to register your cars here with regard to particularly any cars that are located in the state of Florida. I mentioned primary doctor. That is actually one of the main factors a lot of states look to, is where do you go for your medical care? So I always tell clients, one of the best things you can do is just establish a relationship with a physician here in Florida. Go ahead and get on their list as that you are their patient, and that that's going to become your primary physician. Go ahead and get on that list, so that they, you can, as you need medical care for different things, you tend to use your Florida doctor that you are on the list as being a patient of theirs. Where do you keep your nice things? If you have a home up north, and that's where you keep the expensive artwork, and then down here in Florida, you keep some minor things, that's not generally a good sign. So, where do you keep your nice things? Big factors are the couple of things we have listed there at the end. Membership at your place of worship, whether that's a church or a synagogue. What you're trying to do here is establish more factors pointing to Florida than point to your other state. So, for example, if you are a member of a church or a synagogue up north, you should also become a member down here. You wouldn't want to have a situation where you are a member of something up north and not a member of that type of thing down here. So for your place of worship, or also membership maybe at a country club. A lot of people come down here and like to play golf. I certainly would recommend, particularly if they're a member of a country club up north, they go ahead and join one down here. An added benefit, you get to play some additional golf while you're here. But those types of things are important, and it's a totality of all of them. It's not just one thing that you can do. Not on the list, but another good factor would be you can file for your homestead here in Florida, and we're going to talk about what that means in a minute. And you can also file a declaration of domicile with the clerk of court, and that's where you're stating that it is your intent that you become a Florida resident, and it's a legal document that would be prepared and signed. So, there's quite a few things that you can do, and we work with a lot of clients who are kind of on the fence somewhat in Florida, still have a foot in a prior state, and we try to just get them to do as many of those things as we can. Well, as I mentioned, one of the other things that is probably equally, if not maybe even more important, is actually detaching from your prior state. So basically, if you're in a state that requires you to file income tax returns with that state, which most of them do. Florida is very unique. There's only a handful of states like Florida who don't have a state income tax. So you're most likely, your prior state does require you to do some type of filing there. It'd be important when you do your next filing after you've become a Florida resident, that you either file and mark final return, so the state knows not to expect anything in the future, or you might need to file as a non-resident. So it may be you still need to file a return in that state, and maybe you have certain types of income that, even though you're a Florida resident, still need to be reported in your prior state. But in that case, you'd be filing as a non-resident, which means you're only reporting the specific type of income that is required to be reported in that state, maybe wages earned in that state or something like that. But you wouldn't be reporting all of your income. You wouldn't be reporting, for example, your investment income, your interest and your dividends. If you're filing as a non-resident, you would only be reporting the specific things that you have to report in that state. So, it's important in this process, you work with an attorney to help maybe with the legal steps, but you also want to kind of do everything hand in hand with your CPA or your tax advisor to make sure that you are reporting things in a consistent manner. Also, an important factor, and I tell people it's not on the slide, but when you file your tax returns, make sure you file everything using the Florida address. It sounds kind of, maybe you think that's intuitive, but you'd be surprised how many people I see who don't do that. So, you're filing your final return in the other state or the non-resident return right up at the top where you list your address. make sure you use your Florida address. It's very important on your tax filings, also your IRS filings, federal filings. Use your Florida address, and just try to get in the habit of using your Florida address on everything you can. Magazine subscriptions, for example, different things like that. Maybe your prior college or university, when they start to send everything through your Florida address. And at times when you happen to be at your prior state of domicile, you can have your mail forwarded, but it's very helpful that everybody has your Florida address on record, and then if need be, it can be forwarded to the other location. Another thing we see is that I mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit more about homestead in Florida, what that means in a bit, but sometimes when you own a property, there can be a designation that you give on that property, which maybe provides you some type of savings on your property taxes. In Florida, it's called the homestead designation. Other states have a similar concept. Not every state has it, but some do. And you want to make sure if you have any type of designation like that on your prior property that used to be your home, that maybe was giving you some tax benefit, you cancel that designation. You can only have one primary homestead. And if you come to Florida and you declare your Florida property as your homestead, you want to make sure you cancel that designation in the prior state. And that's very important. We've actually run into several issues with clients where they took steps to make the Florida property their homestead, but then they never took the step to basically cancel whatever designation they had in their prior state, and it definitely can cause problems. So that's important. And then the last thing is spending more time in Florida. So we get asked a lot by clients, and you've probably heard it too. What people will say is, well, you need to spend 6 months and a day in Florida. Make sure you're there at least 6 months and a day. So the 6 months and a day, that's the residency concept that we talked about. That is where you are actually living. Domicile, as we've talked about, has a lot more factors than that, but where you live is an important factor. So, it is important, particularly as you are trying to detach from the prior state, that you do spend more time in Florida, particularly that first year when you are moving your domicile from, let's say, Indiana to Florida. That first year, you would definitely want to be in Florida at least what we say the 6 months and a day, at least more than any other state. I think 183 days, but particularly that first year, it would be the most important. And then I tell people, well, in future years, just try to be in Florida more than any other place, because it might not be 6 months, particularly if you're somebody who vacations a lot or things like that. But make sure, I tell people it's important the very first year, try to be here at least 6 months and a day. And then in future years, just try to be here more than you are in any other state. And, I get a lot of people ask, well, gosh, how would they ever know where I am? Well, it's actually amazing nowadays that, well, I guess one of the downsides of technology is that they can check, particularly through cell phone records. And that's one of the common things that they do if you get selected for a residency audit, is they will actually look at cell phone records, and they can tell where your cell phone was pinging on certain days. And they do look at things like that. So, I used to tell clients, be in Florida more and keep a calendar so that you can always prove it. And I think that's helpful. But, nowadays, goodness, with cell phone records, I think you could always look at that sort of thing after the fact and actually tell where somebody was located based on where their cell phone was pinging to the cell towers. So just other things to think about. I think people are always surprised at the lengths that states will sometimes go if they're trying to check on this stuff. But it is, nowadays, you all know how the states are all really hurting for revenue, and they're seeing an exodus of people, a lot of people moving to Florida and to other states like Florida that maybe have a lower tax structure and good weather and things like that. So they are becoming more and more aggressive at checking these types of things, because I think they kind of feel like they're backed into a corner, and they have to, because they're really seeing a loss of a lot of revenue. So let's talk about some of the advantages of Florida residency. We've talked several times on this discussion already about the fact we do not have a state income tax. There's only a handful of states who don't have an income tax, but Florida is one of them. So that's obviously a big benefit. no estate tax either. So some states do impose an estate tax on people when you pass away if your estate is of a certain size. There is also a federal estate tax, but Florida does not have a state estate tax. So if you're a Florida resident domiciled here, you're only going to have to worry about that federal estate tax, not the Florida estate tax. And then you also, if you are a Florida domiciliary, the only things that another state could tax you on for your estate would be any real estate owned in that state or any tangible property owned in that state, like artwork or things like that. So it becomes generally a much smaller tax bill because they're only able to tax those certain things, not your overall estate. We also do not have a gift tax here. There's only a couple states that do have a gift tax. I think Connecticut, maybe one other. But so that's a rare. Most states don't have that, but Florida doesn't have that either. And then another big advantage is the property tax savings that you get on your homestead property. So there's a couple of benefits you get. The first one is that when the property becomes your homestead, the first $50,000 of value is exempt from property taxes. So that is some small savings each year. But the bigger benefit is what we call the Save Our Homes cap. And what the Save Our Homes cap is you all know property taxes are based on the value of the property. They call it the assessed value. That's the value that the state is choosing to tax the property at. Well, years ago, when real estate here was, going crazy the first time, we've had numerous real estate cycles here, boom and bust, boom and bust. And, the one of the boom cycles, the values of the properties were going up so fast. A lot of people that lived here were losing their homes because they couldn't afford the property taxes that were just rising so quickly. So they put this cap on, and basically what it is when the property is your Florida homestead, they can only increase the assessed value equal to about the rate of inflation. So it's usually about maybe 2 to up to maybe at a maximum 3% that they can increase that assessed value. And a lot of years when real estate is really hot, we've gone through one here the last couple of years, the values will increase 10, 15% a year on your real estate. And so the fact that they can only increase that assessed value about 2% a year creates a big differential. We call it the Save Our Homes cap. But you see a lot of situations where people who've been Florida residents for a while, domiciled here and have their property designated as their homestead, the value of the property might be, let's just say $1 million, but the assessed value for tax purposes might only be $500,000, for an example. And so you can end up with a pretty big differential there where your property tax savings are quite large. So we always advise people that when you do become domiciled here, you become a permanent Florida resident, one of the first things you do is have the property declared as your homestead property. And that's helpful to make clear your intent, your domicile, but it's also very helpful from a property tax standpoint. You're gonna have a good amount of tax savings over time. So it's a good thing to do, and to do it as soon as you can, so you can start having that cap be imposed as quickly as possible. There's also some non-tax advantages as to why you might want to become a Florida resident. Number one, we have a good deal of protection from creditors here in Florida. First of all, if you're married, you can own assets as what we call tenants by the entireties or tenancy by the entireties. It's a special form of joint ownership between husband and wife. And in Florida, that is permitted. And it also protects assets that are owned that way from the creditors of only one spouse. It would have to be a creditor of both spouses to go after assets as owned by the tenancy by the entirety. So a good form of simple asset protection planning here in Florida is just to, if you're married, go ahead and have your assets owned that way. And it's generally going to be protected if there's a creditor is only going after one of you, not both of you. Also, homestead property here, we talked about the property tax savings for homestead. It's also protected from creditors. The only creditor who can come after homestead property in Florida would be somebody who has a mortgage on the property, like, a bank. You used a mortgage when you purchased the property. Obviously, they can enforce their mortgage. But, if you're sued, if you're in a car accident, let's say, and they exceed the insurance limits and they're coming after you personally, they're not allowed to touch your house for things like that. So it's another big benefit here for Florida residents. And then also the probate process here in Florida, you never want to go through probate. It's good to try to avoid it. And it's somewhat easy to avoid here in Florida with a little bit of planning. But if you do have to go through it, it's not bad here. I've heard horror stories of people with properties in other states of probates taking years, and in Florida, assuming things are fairly straightforward. You're not dealing with complicated issues like people suing the estate or trying to get the will thrown out or things like that. There really isn't any reason why a probate here should last more than maybe 6 to 9 months. So I think that's a big benefit when I talk to people from other states. A question I get asked a lot. So what does all this mean? But a lot of people will ask, okay, so I have moved to Florida, or I'm in the process of moving to Florida. Do I need a new will? Do I need to get my will updated? I just 2 years ago I met with a lawyer up in Indiana and spent a lot of money, and we did this really detailed plan. Am I going to have to scrap everything? And the answer, do you need a new will? The answer is maybe. I definitely recommend you have your documents be reviewed by a lawyer in Florida just to make sure that everything works. Every state has certain laws, certain things that are different about that state. Maybe it's the way, how many witnesses you need on the will, or maybe it's who can serve as the executor, or like in New York wills, when I see New York wills, they've initialed every single page on the will. That's something they must require in New York. In Florida, we don't require that. But every state has little nuances like that. So just because you move to Florida doesn't mean your whole will needs to be scrapped. And in fact, Florida has a law which says as long as that will was executed with the proper formalities for the state where you signed it, it will work in Florida. So as a whole, your will might work. Now, I think there's a couple of things that I typically recommend. Number one, at least changing the beginning of the will where it says I being a resident of, maybe it says South Bend, Indiana. You'd probably want to change that to say I being a resident of, wherever, let's say Sarasota, Florida. Again, it's one of the factors on the domicile question would be, where did you have your will signed? And, did you have a Florida lawyer involved? So at least updating that piece, I think, is very helpful. And then also just reviewing to make sure that you don't violate any of the specific provisions in Florida. Let's move to the next slide. Okay, so, and what are those differences? So, if you're a Florida resident, you have restrictions on what you can do with your homestead property. There's only, if you're married, you generally have to leave your house to a surviving spouse, not to a marital trust for the surviving spouse. The executor, the personal resident, has to either be closely related to you or be a resident of Florida, one or the other. And then so, if you're naming somebody like a bank, like First Source, that has to be somebody that has a physical location here. And, Chris mentioned that they have an office here in Sarasota now, which would allow them to serve in this role where they wouldn't have been able to do so previous. So there's certain things like this, your will as a whole might be valid, but you might have certain provisions that become invalid because they don't meet the Florida requirements. And no one certainly wants to have anything like that. So it's always good to have the document at least reviewed. So I think that's it. And I think, Chris, we were going to see about maybe any questions.
Great job, Jeff. A lot of great information. And as I mentioned, Jeff's a specialist in transitioning to Florida. So he's one of the many resources that we rely on when people are considering this. So when people registered for the webinar, many ask a question, and I'm going to share some of those with Jeff and some others. So I think you mentioned this, Jeff, at one point, but if you have a business located in, let's say, Michigan or Indiana, and you're still drawing a salary or some kind of income from that business, does that impact my decision about no state income tax in the state of Florida if I change my domicile?
So yeah, what would happen in that case is that particular type of income might still have to be reported in that state. And that would be a question for your CPA. So what it would most likely happen is, if that's the case, even if you're a Florida resident domiciled in Florida, you would still need to file in Michigan or Indiana or wherever it might be, and just report that particular type of income. And you would be filing as a non-resident, which means you're not going to be reporting all of your income. You're not going to be reporting your interest and your dividends or your Social Security benefits, other things that you may have. but you're just going to have to probably maybe report that particular type of income. But no, you can certainly you're still a Florida resident. You were filing there as a non-resident, and they do have a way to file that way.
Okay. Next question. If you move to Florida and claim Florida as your residence or domicile, and your previous house doesn't sell for a year, when it does sell, do you still get the one-time pass on capital gains? And what if you already bought your new house?
So yeah, I think the good news is I think you do still get the one-time pass. The rule for the capital gains exclusion on the sale of the house is that the property has to have been your primary residence for at least 2 of the prior 5 years. So, if I guess what that would mean is assuming it was your primary residence before you moved to Florida, and then you sold it within the 3 years of when you first became a Florida resident, then it would still qualify under that 2 out of the last 5 years rule as your being at least your primary residence for 2 of the past 5 years. So you would still get that exclusion.
Okay. More tax questions. Are there any tax advantages to Florida if you're pulling annual taxable sums from your retirement funds?
Yes, I think that's probably a huge benefit of the fact that we do not have a state income tax here. So assuming, again, it'd be a question for your CPA, and particularly if you have a CPA who's located in your prior state, they would know. But generally, if it's like money coming out of an IRA, for example, it would tend to be taxed in your state of domicile, in your state of residence. And so if you're a Florida resident where we don't have income tax here, I think, there's a very good chance that you're going to be able to exclude those retirement distributions from state income tax. But again, check with your advisor. I mean, certain states may have rules where they try to say, well, if the retirement funds were earned with revenue in our state, we still are going to try to tax it. So obviously, I don't want to give everybody a blanket rule because every state is different, but it certainly gives you a leg to stand on that it shouldn't be taxable for state tax purposes.
Okay. Our next question is about borrowing money in Florida. I'm going to direct that to a borrowing specialist. Cindy Miller is vice president, longtime First Source Bank employee who actually experienced the move from Indiana to Florida to open our Florida office. So the question, Cindy, when you borrow money in Florida, I've heard there's a special document tax. Can you tell us how that works?
Certainly. Let's break it into 2 because there is a difference between mortgage borrowing and regular borrowing. So let's tackle mortgage borrowing first. If you are closing and taking a mortgage out in the state of Florida, there is a document fee that the state of Florida charges. And that fee is approximately 55 cents per 100, and there is no cap to that. So you will see that as part of your closing fees and document fees at your closing. If you're closing anything else, an unsecured loan, a car loan, there still is a fee that the state assesses, a document fee that is 35 cents per 100. And if you're signing those documents in the state of Florida, you would see that fee as well. On the non-real estate side, those fees do have a cap. So the larger the loan, of course, the larger the fee, but the cap is $2,450. So that you won't pay more than that on a car loan or an unsecured loan, a loan of that type. But you will see fees on both when you're signing loans in Florida, or if it's a mortgage and you're signing anywhere. Thanks, Chris.
So it looks like Florida's come up with some other ways to raise state income without having a state income tax. The next question, I've heard about this corporate personal representative, or I'm going to direct it to Justin Cohees with our family office. What are the pros and cons of naming a family member as your executor or personal representative versus a corporate personal representative?
Oh, absolutely. That's a great question. I think probably the advantage to having a family member who's been nominated as PR Executor Act, in some cases, that individual may be already very close to the situation. Maybe they've already been acting as power of attorney for a parent or a loved one. know exactly, what bills need to be paid, know what assets there are, again, are close to the situation. The cons to having a family member named as PR is that despite the fact, even if they are close to the situation, they may not be familiar with the actual probate process, dealing with the court filings. Like Jeff said, it can be a pretty simple process and wrapped up in a matter of months. But that's when it's done by a professional who is experienced in that and has done it a number of times. The other thing is when you name a family member, is you may offend or potentially offend or may unintentionally cause some infighting among other family members, where they are asking a lot of questions, about status updates, and tend to overwhelm that family member who is the PR is executor when they're already dealing with the grief from the loss of a loved one. When you name a corporate entity like First Source Bank, we have our own estate team that is dedicated specifically to doing this, and they do it every day, do it on a regular basis, are familiar with the processes, and they work closely with accountants and attorneys who, again, will make the process go a lot smoother. So again, just because of the familiarity with the process, and kind of taking it out of the hands of the family member, again, when they're already going through a difficult situation, I think a corporate entity makes a lot of sense.
Thanks, Justin. Well, it looks like we've come to the end of our time that we've allotted for questions. We had some questions that we didn't have a chance to get to. We'll follow up with Jeff and make sure we respond to those questions. But we really do appreciate you joining today. We're going to send an email link that will have a recording of this webinar and also an electronic copy of what Jeff's firm's put together, which is The Weather Isn't the Only Advantage. It's the Florida Relocation Guide. But many of the things Jeff mentioned will be in that guide. We'll send an electronic version of that to you. We'll also be reaching out to you with other informative ideas and strategies in the near future. If you have a question or a comment, please call us or email us at the number you see on the screen right now. And again, I want to thank everyone for taking some time to spend with us today, and we look forward to talking to you soon. Bye now.